I am as fallible as every single person in this room, as we saw with that engineering production mistake, or as we see with other things that I make. I mean, I make mistakes often, and I do truly believe that there's constant experiences in those failures. And I think it's the best part of that experience is that the reason why we take failure so hard is because we want to do well, right?
Mhm.
And the best way to do that is then you're going to really stare at that failure and take what you learn from it.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Human Element. Today I'm speaking with Lance James, founder and chief innovation officer at Unit 221B. Lance, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Ben. It's actually very exciting.
Yeah, I think this is going to be fun. All right, so starting off, can you describe a few key events in your life that have significantly shaped your leadership style?
So when I was young and starting out, whippersnapper, thought I knew everything. And, I met a man named Mike Thanis. I don't even know if he's alive now. He's in his 80s if he is, right? I need to check, actually. So thanks for the reminder. And he was ex-NSA during the Vietnam War era, right? And he was my boss, right? And he was one of the most pivotal mentors because he was an executive and he was a technical executive. Right? I was on the IT team, right? I was a network administrator. That's where I started. And I literally really cherished his mentorship. There was one time, for instance, I was getting a little too far with myself with trying with art poisoning, and I didn't segregate the laptop, and I literally knocked down the network. And I'm panicking because this is a major software company, and I'm like, holy crap. And this is the 90s, and like, oh my God, this, and I was just like literally shaking. And he looked at me, and I just salient memory, and he looked at me, he goes, stop, take a deep breath, calm yourself. We're going to fix this. You're not fired. Like this happens. This is your first time. This happens to almost every network engineer out there. Right. But he also taught me a lot about business, right? How to be a leader, how to communicate. I watched him battle. Like, we had multiple offices, and there was a UK office, and they had like their politics and this and that. Watching him interface, right? And he was a good man. And at the end of it, I was this young kid, but we ended up becoming friends, and that was one of them. And it was very impactful because, down to he trusted me at the level he had to get some surgery, and I was the one picking up in the hospital, kind of friends. And so it was, almost like a grandfather, or father kind of bond relationship, but it was just very business. And he was just a very wise person and has gone through war and experiences people don't even want to see. And also just turned out as a really good person. You know what I mean? So it was kind of like this thing where it's just and you don't appreciate it until you're much older for someone like him, right? But I when I think about what really changed, that event was one. Second one was actually tragedy for me, right? A little TMI, but I think most people know I've been very open about it. But I lost a son in 2018, and it was a very complicated matter. It wasn't as simple as I hadn't seen him in a long time because divorces are complicated. And I literally gave in the Zen world, they call it Satori, which is this moment of major awakening, right? And it brought to me, it's personal matter, but it brought to me this place of I am much smaller than I realize, and life is much more precious than I am giving it credit for. And I would say, pre that and post that, over, there was a time to heal. So let's say pre-COVID, post-COVID Lance, I wish I was more, I have some, not regrets, but I just try to do better every day. But I wish it, from a leadership perspective, I had been more mature earlier. And that, unfortunately, was the first time I was you know what? I am going to lean into this pain. I'm going to just let myself feel. And it was the first time I had felt such depth of feelings. I was really good at always recognizing other people's feelings and reading them and stuff, but I avoided my own feelings. And this is actually an important part of leadership. It sounds personal, but it's actually really important. I know the self aspect here. And that just put me on the ground. And I started meditating because I couldn't move. I started really looking inward. I started looking at my life. I look, all these things. And by the time I came back to work, I was at Flashpoint at the time, right? And I was their chief scientist, and I was also running the R&D team, and I was also technically running their security/IT team at the time. So there was two teams, and I had left, and I had to leave because I just couldn't move. And the teams literally looked out and did really well. And unfortunately, they were going into a wavy phase of their trajectory at the time. And then so they had to make some reductions. And when I came in, they asked me to take on the engineering team, which was a 40-person team. And I said, "Are you out of your mind? You're asking a grieving father to do this. Why would you do this?" And they said, "The way you are handling this with such grace and you've calm, it's just like you're different. And there's just this like calm, there's a new energy." And it reminds me, like, if anybody ever has to go through some major grief, don't try to go back to the old self. It's going to be a new self. It's like, it's gone, right? So tragedy was the second one, because then it like really forced me, unfortunately, to calm myself, because I didn't have a choice. And unfortunately, I think that's a very human problem, is that we don't ever really get there until some major thing wakes us up. And so that was the second thing. I'd say the third was founding Unit 221B. I found a few companies in the past, but now with this more, new version of myself, I felt properly confident that I didn't look at it as a battle against other companies, or, oh, I don't like, don't tell me what to do. But it was more looking at the successes and the things that could have like been improved along the way, the experiences, the ups and downs, the experiences. I will say, and I will speak very highly of Flashpoint, they changed the way I am as a leader in a good way. They were very supportive across the way. And that support made a difference for me, because I matured there. I really feel like I matured there, right? And so founding Unit 221B was kind of like, all right, who's coming with me? Who's not from Flashpoint, but like, who's like, and I wanted to build an environment with more clarity, with calmness, with more like me being the Zen gardener that's like, allowing people a runway to grow. There have been mistakes in that, like the philosophy, and that's part of what's been really changing it, is that I can say that running my own company is probably, and I do therapy, so like is sometimes more impactful than therapy, because you learn so much about yourself and others in a situation. So those are the three I would say that are like really good. And I'd say the third one, finding Unit 221B, is still to this day shaping my leadership.
So what, kind of building on that, what non-technical skill has had the most impact on your career?
Pattern recognition, So
Okay.
if I were looking at trying to like think about how it's these questions, I love these questions. They're hard though, because you have to think about yourself, and it's sort of a challenge here to like go, okay, how do I express it? But I've also like heard it from others, where my ability to see people almost like a map or a music page, like, and for context, I'm a musician, well trained, like as a child. And so it's like, I see pattern recognition. So, which is the road to empathy, the road to detecting conflict, road to, finding that. And it's really the road to understanding. Right. And so I'll quote my wife. I said, if I had one quality, I asked her one day, I said, if I had one quality, also non-technical, like one quality, it was like, what's the quality Lance is like on point about? And she's like, you have the ability to make people feel understood. And I believe that is due to pattern recognition. And it's not like my brain, I'm not like consciously going, right? It's just, I am very quick with pattern recognition. If I see someone and they dyed their hair that day, I notice it, or it's just something small changes and things like that. If anything, that has a OCD-ish quirk to it. But, it has served me super well, both in looking at like attribution, like not technical, but like, the people of like maybe adversaries, all the way to the people working with a team. There was a case, for instance, Allison Nixon, who, some of us know, but I work with her. She's our chief research officer. When I first met her, I was at Deloitte. I was trying to hire her. It was a whole story. And she was tracking down bad guys as a hobby, and it was fun. And I said, you want to do this for, let's do this with some handcuffs and some real consequences for these people. And there was a 16-year-old she was going after in Canada. And I introduced her to the NCFTA, which then allowed the connection of the getting this really done. Yeah. And fast forward, it was like, I think I was in Australia, and she was excited. Of course she should be, that this is her first major case that had impact. And she actually helped a guy accidentally get out of jail because it was color ID spoofing. And and it was one of the fastest cases I've ever seen. Right. And I was like, she's obviously got a lot of talent, naturally. And I was, being the leader, I was the traffic light at that time. Right. And what'll surprise people is a lot of people don't realize how much attention I'm actually paying in a situation like this. And she was like telling me about the case. She goes, "Oh my gosh, I said, not only did you help the public, I said you helped this kid too." And she goes, "What do you mean?" I says, "He's dealing with sibling abuse. Go look into it. I promise you that's what's going to happen." She comes back 3 days later. She goes, "How did you see that?" I said, "People don't get on Twitter, and like threaten Ryan Krebs or threaten the FBI because they want to be stuck in home. They want jail because it's the only reference he has to be in a safe place. If he was being abused by his mom or his dad or his parents, he wouldn't even get on the computer because it's a punishment of just being the way he is." I said, "He's crying out for help, kind of like teenage pyromania is, where it's actually usually a hidden abuse and this." So like, for some reason, logical, lateral, and like patterns for me connect when it comes to human behavior. So like, it served me really well. And it was a great story because it really changed how even Allison looked at things. I said, "This is not bits and bytes. This is your first lesson. These are people that you're really changing." And it's tough when we're on a computer and we don't see all that. And so I think pattern recognition has let me really stay in touch with people and understand the value of that. It's not just, like I said, bits and bytes or something you can disconnect from, right? It's like you can see that, and it's great because I can even see patterns with people on chat, like little frequencies or this or that or language they use. And I guess they call that intuition, right? These days, right? But if I break it down to what my brain is doing, I think that's probably a beneficial skill. So
I'll say, I think a lot of us got into this field in using pattern recognition of one form or another.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. It's interesting how you kind of tie that in across the whole spectrum. I mean, so would you say it applies also to the business as well as the people?
Yeah, I think so. So there's a different kind though. It's strategic, right? So there's the bird's eye view, right? So just because you have pattern recognition doesn't always mean it's like I'm looking at little pieces of data. Pattern recognition is also a holistic, quantitative and qualitative, right? So like you take a, bird's eye view of how the chess board is set up, or you see the relationship and you can see based on experiences, right? You're mapping out what could play out, or based on books you've read, or based on experiences of other people, right? And I think that, like when you look at the big successors in the world, like in Apple and Steve Jobs, I was reading something about Steve Jobs the other day about his success in his billionaire wasn't from Apple, it was actually from Next and Pixar. Right. It went to Pixar and they created the CGI, but they had to wait almost 8 years and he spent like almost 50 million of his 100 million he already made from Apple. But what he was smart about is how he actually went IPO the minute Toy Story comes out, and essentially like puts Disney in a predictive lock of like they have to give him 50-50 versus like the original deal was 90% profit for Disney. And that recognition combined with the intuition and understanding of like how the processes work. Right. And I think he did an interview one time and goes, "Well, business isn't that complicated." Right. And, for him, probably not. He was a very talented individual. So I kind of like place it back in, and it's not a comparison, but it's just more like when you look at the successes that Steve Jobs obviously had pattern recognition in a strategic and visionary way. Right. So in businesses, there's process pattern recognition. I wouldn't say that's my strength. Our CEO has that for in spades. I see more chess, right? And how they'll fall out. There's a joke Allison has. It's like, "Oh, before he started Unit 221B, Lance used to do a lot of coups, and it's like, not like bad coups, but like things that would benefit people because you'd see how the things should fall. I'd go out to Deloitte and I'd be like, tell my boss, and he just trusted. I said, "I'm going to DC for, a week. I'll be back." And he knew, because he was a good leader. He was also a great mentor. He would know I came back and brought federal funding and all this other stuff for us because I knew that if we get caught in the silo, this acquisition won't last long. And we had to be very smart about making some things. And my bosses, like the partners above, were not moving as well as they could because they're busy. And then if we got like buy-in from another team and this and that, then they have to then we've sold it. There's not really a choice because it already has movements. It's the whole apologize later problem, but you don't have to apologize because you actually did it right. But that's I'd say it's more of like how did the chess play, the patterns there and things like that, right? So I think in business, for me, I'm like looking at how will this drop and how will this human do this or how will this do that? I don't have to get into that as much now in my position. I feel like it now is more organic and stuff like that. But I have had that as a business acumen, which serves me, I'd say, well. So, yeah.
So what's the most valuable lesson you've learned from a security incident or an operational failure?
Slow down. Even if it's in a hurry, slow down. One of the things that I think I struggle with is slowing down. I get excited, right?
Mm-hmm.
This.
I do too. I know that.
And so I can give one recently, even like with AI. I was, toying around with AI and all this stuff. I got, and operationally, and I knocked down, our production system, getting a little too eager and excited and getting caught up in the psychological conundrum of like, oh, this is going to make my life easy real quick. But no, it's like slow down, step back, use the principles you've always been, trained on, all this stuff. And it was like tough because literally, I'm sure it, ticked off my engineering team, and I'm their boss. So it looked, ridiculous, right? I'm like, ooh, sorry, I was trying to help, but I screwed up, right? And I was very like hard on myself a little bit about it. I'm not going to lie. I was, actually it was sweet because like a couple of my engineers like, don't be too hard. It happens. I did this the other, day and knocked down our Kubernetes cluster or this or that, right? It does happen, right? But it is like, hey, slow down, communicate. If you're making changes anywhere in an ops, make sure everybody's in, in the communication. And that's hard because you're going from context into the code or the DevOps thing you're doing, and then you got to go and be disciplined and say, hold on, before I do anything, let me like document this as my form of communication, ask for a review, because sometimes what'll happen is you just want to fix it. And you just want to like, and that was where my point was. I'm like, now that we have agentic AI, let me fix some things we haven't had fixed for a while, right? Like that was my mindset.
Yeah.
And I just saw really how that fell flat on my face because of my inability to communicate, and not an inability, but like that day I chose not to, and I did it on a weekend, which, not good. And so my entire weekend was shot with anxiety, right? And so, that kind of stuff. So yeah, so now it's like, step back, communicate, run it by everybody else, make sure it's sound. Just because I'm in a leading role don't forget you're still just as human as everybody else in that role, so, yep.
All right. So I got to go off script a little bit because that kind of brings up an interesting thought. So one of the things I've observed kind of leading teams and being led myself is that there are a series of things you learn along the way, usually by screwing them up. And different roles have kind of different things you've got to learn. When I was doing network engineering, there was the standing joke that you're not really ready for the senior role until you've accidentally routed the internet down a T1.
I haven't heard that. There's a name I haven't heard.
Yeah, it's been a while. That was
frame relay X.
Yeah, that was before that, but nah. So does that match your kind of experience? And are there any of those key steps that you look for in people kind of having had experienced those learning moments to transition to the next step?
Yeah, in my interviews, when I interview people, I always ask, tell me a story of your, a failure, a weakness, this and that, right? Mm-hmm. And I know that every time someone's like interviewing with me, they're nervous at first. And so I'm like, hey, just shake it off. It's natural. And then I spend like good 15 minutes trying to get them to not do that, so that you can truly talk about that. Because I want them to know and understand me that it's not actually not admitting to your failures is a likelier chance you will not be.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you tell me you've never screwed up, this job is not for you.
Right. So I find that in every aspect of I actually have a saying. I don't always like the word failure, so I don't try to use the word failure very loudly to people. But we are, we know, there's success and failure, blah, blah, blah. And when you think about that, if fail in a unit test, it actually is a real word and it makes sense, right? So to me, I've always thought of failure as the leading cause of success, right? So, and it really is. There was something, I was having a meeting with some, young up and coming rising stars. They're university students right now, and I met them at a conference, and I have every 2 weeks I meet with them because they are brilliant, and I'm always mentoring, right? So, and they were like, one of the guys, he was like, oh, Lance James, you're the GOAT, we can't imagine what you're doing compared to us. And I'm like, one, do not compare. I said, it's all theatrics, what might look amazing on my freaking resume. Okay. I said, half that is the PR teams, the marketing teams, and they make me look good. In security is a lot of stunt work. There's a lot of showy stuff. We all know there's a lot of theatrics in our game, making ATMs spit out money on that black right? And I respect the perspective of that. It's entertaining. Yeah. We have a very Hollywood-esque perspective.
That's how we get attention.
And it does look sexy, but what they don't see is the amount of mundane effort that you actually have to do. And I always tell people, respect the mundane. It's the thing that everybody wants from you, right? It's not I hacked into this. If your delivery report on your pen test isn't readable and actionable to a customer, they don't care, right? So in the same sense, I was like, look, everything you guys are doing is amazing. There's a reason we're talking, is that like you guys are doing this kid's like 22 with a security clearance working in interns for the government. That's pretty impressive, right? Like, or this and that. So like the comparison part has always bothered me, but the failure, going back to the failure perspective, it's interesting because there's a weird psychological element to failure, right? Like because I think a lot of us suffer from imposter syndrome as we're growing through the industry, right? And that's caused from comparison, which is why I brought up the comparing, right?
Yeah.
And so how we look at it is important. So I have a bit of a mental philosophy I use called Shoshin, which is the beginner's mind. Right. So when I'm taking on something or I'm researching something or I'm working with people, I try to look at it as like, let's approach it. We have our experience and that's never going to like leave our mind. But the practice of like, let's try this as if it's like new to us, allows us to embrace those failures and see something new every single time. There's an old like Zen saying, even if you've swept the floor 1,000 times, but if you like acted like it was the first time, you might find a pebble down there that was interesting. And it was funny because I was doing martial arts class yesterday and now I'm like a fifth Q compared to when I first started a year and a half ago. And we were doing this thing that like we hadn't done it a bit. And I was like, oh, it's funny though. I remember first doing it, it was so hard. And it's like, and I'm like, oh, I miss how that difficulty is now, right? Like, you can actually feel the distance between that difficulty and the experience you get. But it's because of all those failures of not understanding it that I'm now comfortable with it, which then I also thought ironically kind of miss, right? But there's going to be something along the way that I'm going to fail at again and fail at it again and fail at it again and fail at it again, right? And I actually weirdly, when something gets hard, I'm like, ooh, an opportunity, right? Like, and I hope, I think, I was, as building Unit 221B, I was hoping to like also get more people to realize that, hey, imposter syndrome is because we're comparing, right? Like there was someone at work that like, they just have a millennial habit of calling me chief. And I addressed it. I said, it's not personal, but it's remote. Like for me, I don't like that. I want you to not worry about my like chief thing. I said, it just kind of bothers me a little bit. It's not, we worked it through where it was like, it was done in a very polite way, but it was just more, I think it's a me issue, but still like, because I'm like, don't put me on a pedestal. I am part of your team. Right. And I am as valuable as every single person in this room, as we saw with that engineering production mistake, or as we see with other things that I make. I mean, I make mistakes often, and I do truly believe that there's constant experiences in those failures. And I think it's the best part of that experience is that the reason why we take failure so hard is because we want to do well. Right. Mm-hmm. And the best way to do that is then you're going to really stare at that failure and take what you learn from it and move forward. And I think, I know I like really like, I don't do well with failure. I'm not going to lie. I'm a little hard on myself. Like I'm well with everybody else failing and I can talk all my game on beginner's mind. But when I fail, I'm like, ugh. Like, and I literally, I growl at myself about it and stuff. And then I just remember my own philosophies as well. And I'm like, keep moving, so that's, yeah.
How do you balance technical expertise with the people skills you need to be a good leader?
I look at it as people first, right? Mm-hmm. So I try to look at it as, we go back to comparing and this and that, but like outshining anybody, I am many times probably the most technical person in a room, right? And, in many cases, but that shouldn't or doesn't really matter to me. If anything, I sometimes take that for granted and realize, hey, bring that down a little bit, especially when I was younger. I think someone told me that, and they said, you don't realize that you're taking your level of advanced, knowledge, experience you've had for granted. So you're like, oh, you're a beginner. You can figure this out, and I'll be so helpful. But the reality is that there's like, and I don't know how to teach that because I just kind of like, I was, hacker in the 90s and went through it. And like, I can't, I don't know how to like actually do that. I think that there are people that are really good at building frameworks out of cybersecurity, and that's just not me. I'm just more like, let me go break something, right? Or let me go build something, right? Mm-hmm. So my individual self is very technical, but I have to recognize that my leader self is not about the individual, right? And so what I do is try to think about as the we first, the leadership first. No matter what I'm doing, I am still being perceived as a leader in the room, even if I'm doing it by myself, right? My individuality can be on my weekends, right? And in the sense of that. Now, I bring my individuality to the room, right? And stuff. But I actually remember, I think I was at Flashpoint and I was running the security team, and my guy who really made me look good, our director of security, we were in Panama actually at a conference. I'm sure you know which one and such.
Yep.
And so we were just in the room and he goes, you know what I really like, Lance, he's like, you have absolutely no fear of saying you don't know what that means.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, and to an engineering team and to a team like this that has a bunch of people that have different skills in so many different areas. Like there's so many areas in our field that there's no way I could be learning. Like my brain, I think, can learn things, but like I'm not going to get Kubernetes this week. Okay. There are people I'm going to hire that will get Kubernetes. Okay. Or the deep open search or Elasticsearch or whatever. It's like all that data scaling stuff, not going to be me. It's just not, but there are amazing people. So I'm not more technical than them in that area, and they're not more technical in that and that. It's a team of like, we are putting together a puzzle that we need all pieces to actually like make the puzzle work, right? So, but it's the absolutely like one, don't be afraid of like absolutely saying, I don't even know what that means. What's that acronym? Right? Like, can you like elaborate? And then I also, with the leadership, I also try to be like, hey, can you elaborate for the rest of the room too? Because sometimes the engineers might be talking to business people, this and that, blah, blah, blah. I do stay very sharp on my technical chops as an individual. I've got VS Code open as we speak kind of thing. I like technical. It's like, it would be like saying just because you're a music teacher, you'd stop playing music, right? So I'm not going to do that, right? That's it. I have to balance out that, in leadership time, we need me. I literally talked to someone yesterday about this though. I said, if I'm in code mode, which I pick certain days to do technical to help as an IC on the engineering team, I'm like, you can't give me like one-on-ones or people day, because my brain, for some reason, takes a bit more time to get into empathy mode or people mode if I'm in like code mode. It doesn't do a context switch very fast.
Yeah.
And I, we were joking. I said, I admit that about myself. I will be a little grumpy if I'm in code and I suddenly have to look up and be in a meeting with people, right? Like that's who I am. So I select days my Wednesdays are work engineering code days. I don't have ones. I have certain days where I'm like, this is my people day. I'm getting all that stuff done. Or I have an executive function day where I'm like just getting contracts done or whatever. And so I actually like purposely have like figured out how like my brain compartmentalizes these things, and to spare everybody else from like my moodiness, right? Which they don't need to know about. That's my individual problem, right? My personal responsibility. I select ways that I can be worked with, right? Almost like a dot plan or a README, but it's really mine. So yeah, I do balance it, but it is like, I'd say it's like, I ask questions. I try to like keep learning, and but I also I don't care about being like the smartest in the room, because it's not that the smartest in the room thing's a comparison thing again. It's not really smart. There's levels of experience, and there's experience in certain areas, right? Whether it's, like all these different things. So like, it's really, I can bring a certain strengths to it, and I have things that I have gaps for, and acknowledging and understanding my gaps in that place is why you bring in a team and you work with that team, and you can then also appreciate the people and their skills and their experiences. So
yeah, I think that's a pretty powerful thing I've learned myself in terms of being upfront about this isn't going to work for the way my brain operates, and it's okay to. It's okay to communicate that. That's not a weakness per se. That's a strength that you're able to talk about it and be confident enough to talk about, bring it up.
Yeah.
How do you define effective team culture, and how do you build that into your teams?
That's a good question. I think it starts with some principles and values, obviously, right? Mm-hmm. But not overly principled, not overly, but over principles can really make you a bit rigid. Right? Mm-hmm. Everybody's coming in so differently. Now, I live in an advantageous place, New York, right? I can walk down the street and someone can be having the most audaciously amazing outfit. And it's amazing because I'm in New York, but if you go to some rural town, it's going to be like, what the hell? And then you're going to get stared at all day, right? And so I get to see so many different types of people, which I do think collectively really expands your view of the world a little bit of like, okay. And so you sit there, and really comes down to I treat it as like a dojo. Okay. And I don't mean the competitive type. I study a martial art that is non-competitive on purpose. Right. And I do that because I think that I think competitiveness has its place in business and all these other things. There is a place. Don't get me wrong. It drives progress, right? It really does, right? And sports drives, things and stuff. And so, but for me, it's collaborative, right? How can I make you feel welcomed and a place that you feel safe and understood? That is like, for me, a core tenet, right? But that's my personal approach. I've also learned that some of that can be taken advantage of. Some of it, if not managed correctly, can, I would say is almost like I felt like I have cases where when I was trying to figure out how to balance that, it's like, how do I be assertive and strong, but also yet compassionate and feeling that people are being listened to and understood, right? And also just how do I bring my own energy to a room, right? And so even with Unit 221B, I would say that was like kind of interesting because I might have been a little too one way and not the other for a while. And it's had some lessons that I don't necessarily want to dive into, but it's it's caused losses and gains, right? And that's right. And so it really starts with core value sets, right? But I think the welcoming and collaborative is whatever you can do to get to that place, because you come into work, you're not there to mind people's lifestyles or worry about all those things, right? And we are in the tech industry, okay? The variant minds you're going to meet that have such strengths in certain different areas and opinions and strong opinions in some senses. And there's a lot of energies that come. And some people will have big emotions. Some people will be quiet and introverted. And I think that it's almost like a tapestry, right? And if you can almost see it as a flowing, culture of flowing water, where it's no one's upset when the water gets big and no one's upset when it goes back down, right? And there are good and bad things when it gets up and down, right? Like it just is. And so the more you do that and you have this welcoming, collaborative spirit inside of it, I think that tenet of that set is culture. And then there's principles. Still a business, right? We're still here people are in a transaction with this company or this company or this company to make money, feed their family, and do, hopefully in tech, we get the privilege and honor of doing exciting work. And so outlining and recognizing that this is still a business and then there's a mission, the values that we have, right? Like our company, we want to disrupt and just, really stop bad guys, right? That's our thing, right? Yep. Simple mission. Right. But we do it with respect, right? We've stopped bad guys and hired some of them or did help them with their community service or this and that, because, just because we bust you doesn't mean that we're judging you that you're permanently wrong, right? And there are a lot of crazies out there. So, there's also that, again, do your homework. But we've done some where we've done rehabilitation and turned people around and helped them move forward in their lives. Because I think some of us all know that we're all hackers once, and that, it's not that far of a line to when you're younger to get into the wrong crowd, right? And such. And that culture comes from listening to the type of people that we have. Right. The Allisons of the world or the investigators of the world, they've all done stuff as a teenager. We know this. Right. So there's this level of empathy that exists. Right. So it's been a culture of compassion, but also, at least for us, bunch of badasses, right? We're tough, but with compassion, right? But I do think no matter what, it's got to be welcoming and collaborative and stuff. If you don't have that in your culture, you're doing it wrong and such. And also learn and make sure there's space for people to speak, right? So one of the challenges is someone like me, who's an extrovert and can talk, needs to I'm saying shut
up and listen sometimes. Yeah.
Shut up and listen, right? And so, and if that takes me a little more effort, which of course it does, then that's worth it on my effort for the culture, right? You know what I mean? So that's if I got to go to I don't know, silent school or something and train myself, whatever it is. But, I actually had Flashpoint when I was running the engineering team, I had my notebook at the top and it said STFU Lance. And it would and because, a lot of the engineering team, they take 30 seconds to a minute to think and then respond, right? And I realized if I'm not comfortable with silence as a leader, I'm going to fail them, right? And so that's also part of that culture, is giving people that space to express themselves safely. So, yeah.
Nice. What mental models do you rely on when you're making cybersecurity related decisions?
It depends on what I'm doing, because unfortunately, for me, I'm a bit of a unicorn where it's oh, Lance, we need an IR thing. And there's a total different state I'm in for that, right? And I'd warn people, I'm yo, I'm in that state right now. Do not count me as an executive right now. I'm here, right? So, but first principles thinking, obviously, when in doubt, deconstruct. right? I'm also kind of really in like a do your research, do your homework, do all of this perspectives of that because I can try to rely on my experience and that's important. But things in cybersecurity are constantly changing, right? Constantly. There's a new thing every single day. And now with AI, it's like new this, new that, new like tool use. We haven't even talked about the freaking security implications of like allowing the fact that it can just do access everything and your credit card and this and that. And you're like, right, because of the convenience, right? So same here is like I try to do a step back, first principles. When in doubt, I deconstruct. I look at all the data, look at the step back. If I get frustrated, which can happen also in a moment, it's walk away, maybe breathe and step back and meditate. And that's a mental mind for me too, because you could wreck something if you don't, or
you're back to slow down.
Yeah, and cause it to slow down or float, stuff. That walk, what I'm talking about? I used to be like, when I was a network engineer, it'd be like ASA picks firewalls or all these things. And like the little configs get a little bit annoying after a while. And then you're like, why is this not sticking? Why is it not? And it's because your brain's burning, right? And it's like, okay, I got to go take a walk. And then when you walk, it always refreshes a little bit, right? So get outside, things like that. If I'm doing red teams, I'm Lockheed Martin kill chain all day, like following that like thing. I wouldn't say that's a mental model, but it's like I put myself in a framework to understand it. One of the challenges I have is I'm a bit ADHD, so I can go like this. So sometimes I'll lock myself into the proper framework to do the job. And I'll use my mental model is also like taking that outline and going, all right, step back, slow down, put this framework, and I lock myself into that outline. And that way, for the customer or for the people I'm serving, they're getting what they need to have and go through that process. And then in cybersecurity, also beginner's mind because everything's new anyway. So it makes it actually easier a little bit for that. And then also, if you can, stay present in the moment and stuff like that. Like, don't get distracted, turn your stuff off. Like, just when people are looking at like an incident or if they're looking at like, something important, and it's like the bigger the company, the harder they fall problems, right? You have to be present. You can't be distracted. You need to be making sure they're really there. So I guess those are the models. I don't know if there's like a certain like ISOCOM or something like that I'm supposed to be doing here, but I'd say I kind of keep it simple in that sense. Yeah. So, and I do one more. Actually, I do a daily personal stand-up with myself, actually. So I adapted the agile model when I was running engineering. I really saw this value of how team psychology works. And I said, can I also apply it to my own individuality as well? And so every morning, and my wife and I actually do it too. We do, what did I do yesterday? What am I doing today? I have a commit to three main things that I want to focus on. And that's also a big one. Like I have a commit to 3 for sequential work. I don't multitask. It's like boom, boom, boom. And then I'll cross that off, get a reward, in that sense of the cross off and then boom. Mm-hmm. And then so it has that. And then it has my feelings, being and grateful. So in the mornings, I'm like, how am I feeling today? Might be anxious, might be feeling off, might be like unprepared, feeling a little dragged, right? Whatever. Despite my feelings, what am I going to be today? Present, calm, focused, blah, 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 like whatever I wanted to like kind of like use the cognitive behavioral therapy remapping and say, okay, I've acknowledged my feelings. They aren't everything. What am I, I'm going to go rock steady, right? And then grateful. I'll do 3 or 4 things that I'm grateful for, which neuroscientifically has been proven to really kind of like get you out of your myopic, stressful states and it's kind of like just look around you real quick. And so I do that every morning. I have an alarm that pops up and does that. And that's a mental state for my day. And that all my day is cybersecurity, right? So I know it's a little more generic, but it really allows me to like step back as a human being, as a leader in cybersecurity and a good perspective. So
nice. So you mentioned ADD or ADHD and multitasking. Yeah. So do you find ADHD to be a superpower or a burden?
It's interesting how that works. It's a spectrum, not a binary, right? So for instance, I think a lot of people with ADHD, there's the debate on medicines and this and that. I will be PMI and say that medicine has helped me a lot. That said, could I cope on my own? I've had weeks without medicine and pulled it off. Mainly, I think the withdrawal part is just that it kind of like messes with my emotions a little bit, it has those moments. But because, it does, there's a frustration aspect when you first learn you have ADD if you don't have it or don't know about it or whatever. And like for instance, a lot of females are late diagnosed. So that's like such a, frustrating because like as a kid, I had it and like, I was 5 or 6 and they were like, let's put him on some drugs, right? It was very obvious, right? I'm all over the place. But ironically, I could practice 6 to 8 hours of violin piano a day, whether I had medicine or not. And I told my parents, don't put me on the medicine because I can't feel the music. right?
Ooh.
And back then the medicine was a bit more disassociative, especially as a child. And you wouldn't believe what the medicine would do. I just sit there like this in class, like absolutely quiet. So it was a little like, I'm sure this was the 80s, so they were testing all this out. You had blood tests every 2-3 weeks, right?
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is the medicine itself, the ones that I have now, the Vyvanses, the this and that, are weirdly will not work on people that do not have true ADHD. It will cause them to have anxiety over time and this and that, and maybe even like some just really bad situation, right? And it's because of the way the dopamine works, right? When you have ADD, your dopamine, is a little bit lower. So it's similar to serotonin reuptake inhibitors. They move up your serotonin to the level you need if you have depression, right? Same with this. It's a dopamine reuptake inhibitor, and it basically takes it and puts you at kind of like what you would say is the right amount, right?
Yeah.
And so with people who don't have it, it will take them higher. And if you get into too high, that's where schizophrenia gets it. So schizophrenia is actually an issue of dopamine, of too much dopamine, right? So like you have these like baselines, right? So ADD's in the middle where we get that finally there, but I'm sure it gives a little bit of a peak, right? But what's interesting though is ironically, when you have no meds and you don't know you have ADD, you're good with the short-term bursts of focus. Whereas your lack of dopamine is really, it's supposed to be this chase that you get. The dopamine's the release once you actually get there, but you don't have that ability to stay there. You keep going like this, right? That's that. So what I have found is that untreated ADHD can feel like a curse, right? Not knowing you have it, not having this and that. And so I think I've been very, like, I'd say when I was like starting in my 30s to 40s and becoming really a strong leader, I saw the importance of that mundane and also the promises you make to people, right? Like follow through is such a difficult thing with untreated ADD and even with people with ADD, right? And so I looked at it as the medicines helped me like build a structure to then work on my ADD every day. I now have a commit to 3 structure. I don't do multitasking. I stay in sequence. These are choices I've had to make.
Yeah.
I could be on the meds all day and it will not change my life over time. I'll still have like, I can focus now a little bit, but there's other aspects of ADD the medicine does not treat, right? And so there was a moment in time, I remember I was like, I want people to take me seriously. I want to make sure that I keep my promises to other people, and I want to do it. And it became down to a value of transaction. I made someone a promise, and I am a man of my word. That's how I felt at that time. And then I started building structures, like how do I like do this and this, and routine and all these things helped. Ironically, people without structure crave structure, right? So I created structure for myself, and now I'm a super structured individual, right? And a super for me. So now, once it's structured, once everything is good, I would say that I'm not saying ADHD gives you an advantage. I don't think labeling it that way can be an appropriate thing. But in my experience, I think having the structure and like learning how to cope and building the mechanisms and being vocal about the support and not necessarily making it a crutch because, it's still your personal responsibility to manage that. It's, you can't like make ADD your excuse for the rest of your life once you've identified it. That's the whole point, right? And then once you have that, like, I feel like, yes, I get probably a lot more done than a lot of people do, but it's because I built a system for myself. Even if I share that system for someone else with ADD, it doesn't mean it'll work for them. The system has to be for theirs and it has to be theirs. But for me, I feel like, I am in an optimum state. But it took a long time to get there. So it's not like superhuman naturally. I think that you got to put the work in to learn how to fly. And I want to caveat that I can't, this is not a medical comment on ADHD and that. It's just my personal experience.
Yeah. So, all right, let's imagine we gave you 5 minutes in a time machine to go back 20 years and talk to your former self without violating any NDAs. What's the advice you give?
Can I have 2 pieces of advice?
Sure.
1, stop rescuing. So in cybersecurity, there's a lot of rescuers. Our job is to protect other people, and we like feeling like the hero. It's a dopamine. Ding.
That's it.
Right? Feels freaking good. Pat yourself on the back. I just like rescued ransomware. I ain't gonna lie, that still exists and it totally should be. And that's what we do. That is our job. Right. But I would literally tell myself from a personal experience, don't rescue people. It's not actually a good quality in that sense. It's actually based on fear, not like a healthy, dose of things. Long story, essentially, it played a lot of playing in my young years of any kind of like hardships I've had. That right there is like basically learn how to love yourself earlier if possible, right? Because ironically, you got to make space for yourself. Now, I don't know if I would listen, but essentially, that first one where you don't rescue and, here's the therapist number, right? So secondly, it would be, you don't need to carry it all, which just kind of plays into the rescue. Rest isn't surrender, it's leadership.
Mhm.
So one of the things I've had learned as a leader is that my boundaries, right? I'm not available because I might be resting my mind and resting my body and resting my spirit or whatever, and so that I can be really optimal. Because my agreement as a leader to everybody is to be at a good state in myself, so that I can be available to them when it's called, right? Not, oh, I got to say yes to you, and you got to need me, and all this and that, and all this, and I'm going to tell you what to do, and blah 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 blah, this and that. It's literally, I have to be rock steady. So I have to train myself to take care of myself. And I would say that, I guess it's one passage, but like the rescue is the term I would use on the first, conversation with myself, more personal level, right? Like, hey, don't rescue. That's really going to cause you some pain, but then the second part of it is that learn to like rest and be okay with rest. People will still love you if you're resting. People will still respect you if you're resting. People will still see you as a great leader if you're resting, because I've seen leaders that literally like max themselves out.
Yeah.
And they can't really be a leader because they like when I was at Flashpoint, after I was grieving, they said, when they offered me the position, I said, okay, we're going to do it my way. My energy is different. On Mondays, we're going to move all our important meetings to Mondays. I cannot get things done if there's just a zibit of meetings and they're unimportant. Also, go through and find out if they're actually important. Tuesday, you're not bothering me at a meeting at all. I'm working. Right. And, Wednesday, this and that product. If you want to be in a stand-up, no, go get some requirements. And then, blah, blah. We changed a lot of things, but it was really about like recognizing my own energy and what I needed in my life. And I had to do that. I had to recognize myself, my own things, not please everybody else, not obligate. And I had to learn to say, no, this is the deal, right? Like, this is how I'm going to do it. You wanted me to be the leader. I'm going to do it this way. And there's a reason behind it, right? And, I'm like, also, you're adding a meditation room, right? And so I got a pillow and a thing, and I'm like, I need to meditate probably about 3 times a day right now to get my energy reserved, because I'm dealing with a lot of emotions, right? And so they sound silly, but it literally changed the company that year, because I didn't, it's like one thing about grieving is like you finally have realized that you only have room for your own emotions for a second. So you're like, you learn to say no for once, right? You're like, no, leave me alone, right? Like, I'm dealing with some shit. And for grieving, it's the one excuse that no, you learn and can actually be there. And then once you practice saying no, all right, which is, I think, really comes down to it, learning to say no, not like learning like arbitrary no, but like no for your recognizing your own competency and your own boundaries internally. That's the key. So doing that allowed me to have a marathon pace. And it is still to this day a marathon pace. Adapt. Don't obviously be like, if stuff's going on and stuff, and you need to be a little bit more adaptive. I've also, like that, but like, yeah. So so learn boundaries internally, and, don't rescue and don't oblige to others. Like, learn there's a reason for your rest, and rest is not surrender. It's definitely leadership.
Nice. All right. How do you approach mentoring the next generation of security professionals?
I lead and approach that with vulnerability and curiosity. So I'm not their boss, right? I'm coming there to like learn. And also I come in usually with excitement, because when I mentor, it's like, I have a weird thing where it's like, I get almost like a spark of excitement for certain people. And to me, it's their drive is actually, ironically, the first thing I care about more than it is. You can have talent, but if you're not doing anything with it, who cares, right? Right. So there's this drive, right? Good examples when I met Allison, right? I met her like almost 12 years ago, something like that, 2000. I think, I don't know, 2013. Sorry, I met Brian Krebs in 2005. 2013. So a long time ago, right? And I just got this like spark. And ironically, back then I was like, just like trying to like pitch to her, like, dude, come here, and like da da da. And I was like, got excited. But actually, over the time, once we got past that day, I was ready to I'm the type that's ready to fight for them immediately. Like I'll like, move every like door that's closed to like be like, yo, move out of the way. We got to make some space here. This is check this person out. This is like cool. But I come really and it's like really focused about vulnerability and curiosity. Like I want to be my most self because the younger generation is looking at me and they can't help it because that's how it works with that. It's almost like a dad meets like kid thing, right? Where it's young adult and this and that with like, I want to be like you. Right. And that not about me per se, but the person who's mentoring, that's the whole relationship is there. The kid is the young person is thinking, I want to be there. Right. That's what they get attracted to. And that when you're mentoring, and that is a thing about, but do not exploit. Right. And so I try to show up with like not hiding what I don't know, like same as before. I try to ask questions about investing time. I try to do it as more like we're collaboration. Like these two guys this week I was like, they were talking about maybe going to masters for this thing. And I said, actually, Harvard's got an interesting program. Like I have some friends and talk. And then we started like, they looked into stuff. I looked into stuff, things like that. And so it isn't like I don't try to look at mentorship as I know everything. I actually look at it as I'm there to try to learn who they are and learn and be part of their journey along the way and support them. Right. And it's almost like a club, right? We get together and we like do this. Like there was actually a kid, he's 15 or 14. I met him in, he did a Black Hat talk actually, and it was quite young for that. And he's got a pressure going on him. He lives in another country, and I've met his mom and all this stuff. And like like that with children, I go through a process just for making sure it's good. Sure. And so he'll out of the blue signal me some cool stuff he's working on. He's a very smart kid, and he started like getting a little paranoid about his career because there was like, he's a kid and he's probably done some, things and comments or whatever when he was a kid. And he's like, oh my gosh, do I need to like hire these people like, because he's actually getting interns and getting paid and all this stuff. He's kind of a boy wonder. And he's like, do I need to hire like, people to like do an OSINT on me and like clear out my data? I'm like, dude, you're 15 or 16 years old. You're fine. Right. Like, but it's hard, like, in his world, he's like having a hard time with that. And I said, don't let anybody, I'm a little more upset that someone's trying to sell you that at your age. Because one, it doesn't really clear anything. And two, like, you're going to be fine. Like it's not a fickle industry and you're a kid. People do stuff, right? And also what you've named is not even that bad. So like, but he was starting to have that and it was increasing. And so I started thinking, I said, hey, are you actually okay? Like, it sounds like you're having anxiety. And I said, when do you step back from like a computer? Like, when do you like step back from this, right? And he goes, I have it. I said, well, he's like, they have me in private online school because all this stuff. And I said, the pressure of this industry at your age. I said, when was the last time you touched grass and just was a kid? Right. And I'm like, he's like, yeah, like I haven't. I said, do me a favor. What's your favorite thing outside of computers too? He's like, I really like chess. I said, find a chess club. I said, we're not going to talk about cybersecurity this week or next week until you find a chess club and you tell me about your games. You're hanging out with people and you're actually doing stuff. You need to touch some grass, right? And he's very, he's actually texted me like this week and last week telling me about his club chess games. And he goes, I feel a lot better. I said, yeah, you got to like set some, kid time, man. Because like, humans will, if you say yes to everything, they'll take it.
It will go on forever if you let it. Yeah.
Right. I said, but it's very rare to be a kid, right? And you won't be having that, right? So it's like, I vulnerable curiosity, but like, with kids his age, it's more like a dad approach. Like, hey, you sure you're okay? Let's talk about that instead of your cybersecurity cool stuff right this second, because it seems like you're kind of spazzing out and there's something going on there, right? And so in a great conversation, things like that. So it's like, it is variable in my mentor style and stuff, but it is, I don't want to waste time like not being vulnerable. Whether it's them being vulnerable or me vulnerable, the reality is we're learning. And so when I go to like the dojo, I'm absolutely super raw and actually ironically shy on the mat because I feel like a child that is vulnerable. It's just the way the martial arts mat works when you're a beginner. And I think that if you acknowledge the same style here is that it's like we're all learning here. I'm learning about you. You're learning about me. I may have offer things, but they also offer so much too. Their genius, their modes, their things, right? Allison, she and I started as like more of a mentee more thing, and now we're like family, and like I'm more like an admirer. I'm like, yay, right? But it all started that way, and it's like we might have a conversation about the bits and bytes or this and that, right? And it might affect her. But I've also learned so much in that moment. Right. And so it's really just like, it's not about the title of mentor and mentee. It's really about a collaboration, things like that. And so hopefully that makes that clear. So,
yeah, absolutely. So, Lance, thank you. Awesome conversation. Enjoyed it immensely. So that's all the time we've got for today. So before we wrap, if people want to follow along with your work, where's the best place to go?
LinkedIn. Just look up Lance James, and it's the guy with the red tattoo on the hand in the picture, and follow or connect with me. And that's kind of my journey there. So
if you're into agentic AI and other emerging technologies, I definitely recommend keeping track of what Lance is up to. There's some there's always something interesting going on. Thank you very much, sir. Great chatting with you, and we'll talk to you soon.
Truly a pleasure.